Here we go. Ah.
So when we look at the industry, what's really exciting about it, even on a global scale, is that there's various ranges of industrialization, which gives us an opportunity to look at how individuals can be successful within their home at mass producing an insect, and then how some of these opportunities have been expanded to be completely industrialized. And I think we recognize some of the major players, from the yellow mealworm and house cricket to black soldier fly. Now, with Western society, I think we're finding that it's a wonderful time to be involved in the industry because it is something new, but through efforts of many people that are present today, we see that some of these products that are insect-based are commonly used and have been accepted. This is exciting, but we are still at the beginning with many of these different insect byproducts or products in terms of their integration. So there's still lots of work to be done. Next slide. Keep going. Yeah. So why insects? I think for many of us that are involved, I think if we were to say what our background, back up, please. Oh, we're going really far. There we go. Yeah, I think, it's interesting with many of the people that I've met in this industry is that we are very layered in terms of why we do what we do. I mean, obviously the economics are really important to us, but we also recognize the benefits of the industry, not only for dealing with issues such as climate change and environmental protection, but creating jobs, saving lives, and boosting economies. But regardless, the environmental impact is something that we're very much aware of, and there is greater need for diversification of what agriculture is and how we optimize the resources that we have available so that we can produce the food that can be used by people throughout the world. Next slide. And again, with the report that came out in 2013 from the FAO, articulating very well the opportunities that exist for insects as food and feed, it really caught a lot of the governmental agencies around the world, caught their attention, and has created opportunities. And these opportunities are through shifts in regulations, funding opportunities, and providing infrastructure for the development of the industry. And we're seeing that occur not only in the Western world, but also throughout other regions of the world as well. Next slide. And this is a slide I use quite often. I think if we look at what we do with land use and the impact of traditional agriculture on the global environment, we see that there is a very strong need for us to do something to diversify what we do. If we look at land use, some common figures that you see here is that a third of all the land that we have is actually used for agriculture, but 70% of the water that we use is for ag, and it's responsible for 24% of the greenhouse gases that are emitted globally. And that's a huge concern with climate change, but also with proper management of the resources that we have. Next slide. And for myself, and focusing on the black soldier fly, I think we also recognize that it's not just within the insects and food industry, that it's like a spider web where this industry is connected with multiple industries throughout the world. And that's something for us to consider in terms of how NACIA moves forward, or IPIF and any other organization, is how we partner with these different industries, such as the aquaculture industry that relies on wild-caught fish as a feed substrate for fish produced our farm. So I think looking at ways to bridge with these different industries and how we can partner together could create opportunities for the insects as food industry. The last thing we want to do is be viewed as a competitor with the industries rather than a partner. So I think focusing on partnerships would be really good, especially, and if, from the US perspective, looking at the various commodity groups such as soy or maize, peanut, and these are just a few examples. they have a large influence within our government. So seeing ourselves as partners with them rather than competitors could create opportunities for us. And then the paradox that we're all very much aware of is that while we are concerned about producing food, we waste a lot of food. And that food waste is responsible for a lot of the greenhouse gas that's produced in the world, as previously discussed. And then if we compare it at a nation level, food waste is the #3 producer of greenhouse gases. So just by our working to recycle these food wastes and produce protein, we could have a positive impact on the environment. So where are we today? Again, this is getting at not limiting the definition of what our industry is. We should be receptive to other insect models that could be integrated and diversified. Diversity creates stability. And that's not just with the insect models, but also looking at the byproducts or the products that we produce from these models. Something that is very instrumental to the industry and its success, obviously, are organizations like NACIA or IPIF, because they are engaged with the regulatory bodies, and we have to educate people as a means to create these opportunities. Next slide. And this leads towards understanding how to facilitate growth from the perspective of who's going to work in these factories. So we have to think about how we're going to educate the next generation of industry personnel, which leads to the idea of the National Science Foundation opportunity that Dr. Jordan's going to speak about in a little bit in detail. But the idea is that through industry and working with government funding, we can then create the next generation of educated employees that will work in your company. And by educating these individuals, we create stewardship, which means that they're taught the importance of what they do, but how to do it properly without impacting the environment or creating products that could potentially be harmful to individuals. Next slide. So what is the future? I think increased production to meet potential demand. I think the global demand is a tsunami that needs to be addressed. So how can we work together to create new industry, diversify the industry to meet that demand? Next. Another is to create national and global standards of quality. In my mind, I think about the commodity stock exchange and the idea that one day insect protein will be going across the ticker, and there will be futures in terms of estimates on the value of the product, which creates opportunities to have brokerships that will purchase and distribute the product across different companies. So I don't see why the insects as food and feed industry would not create products that would equal value as wheat or corn, maize, or peanut, groundnut. And I think that's where the industry will go. It can grow to that level, but we have to figure out what that framework will look like. And then obviously the center that Dr. Jordan's going to speak about in terms of its opportunity as related to advancing research to make sure that we address the issues that are of concern in terms of the quality of materials being produced, but also how to optimize the process so that we can get the greatest return from our investment, and also looking at how to diversify those product lines. Next. And more importantly is producing that next generation of employees. We need to have people that can properly work within your companies, work within academia, and bring the two together so that we can have proper stewardship of the industry. But what does it all mean? I think the biggest thing is that there's tremendous optimism for the industry. As of today, I've not seen anything in the news or in the published literature to indicate anything of concern in terms of what we're trying to do. But that doesn't mean that insects as food and feed is a panacea for solving the world issues. We're still trying to figure out the full scope of what the industry means. So that means that we need to have an open mind. Definitely, there's a tremendous amount to be done, which means that there are opportunities for all of you to be involved in the industry, and NACIA is a perfect platform for doing that. And through NACIA and these type of meetings, we can have continued discussion of how to work together and not against one another to develop a global agenda that represents everyone. And this relates not just to the industry, but very much about the research and the outreach. Educating people is extremely important because those individuals in many countries vote for the leadership that we have in the country, and that leadership decides things such as regulations, funding opportunities, and product introduction to an economy. Next slide. So in the end, I think one thing I want to caution everyone about, and I think we actually have a lot of great minds here, and that is think outside the box. Don't restrict yourself to the common ideas that we know are driving the industry today, because ideas outside the box could result in new opportunities for all of us around the world. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jeff. And we'll transition to Heather Jordan to share more about the North American Research Center for Insects as Food and Feed. If you have questions for Jeff, go ahead and put those in the chat. Again, we may not be able to address them with Jeff today, but we can certainly follow up. And Wendy Lou, I want to double check since you're hosting. I forgot to press record. Are we recording?
Yes, we are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right, Heather, let's turn over to you and I will drive your slides.
All right, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today, and thanks, Jeff, for that great overview of the industry. And as Jeff said, we're poised to develop a global platform for insects as food and feed. So this is a great segue to tell you about where we are with the vision for the National Science Foundation Center for Insects as Food and Feed. Next slide, please. But before I get into the specifics, I want to give you some background on the rationale of the vision. As Jeff mentioned, the industry has innovative ideas, but globally, linkages between industry, universities, and regulatory agencies are fragmented. So individual companies are conducting research within their own units, academia is conducting its own research, and often there's this disconnect, right? So this fragmentation leads to limitations with getting funding, with the pursuit of synergy, corporate development that includes product diversification, market stabilization, human resource development, and development of a national and global standards, as well as optimization as well. Next slide, please. So where does NSF, or the National Science Foundation, fit in? Well, they provide a structure for academic researchers to conduct fundamental pre-competitive research of shared interests to the industry. So they provide funding to support the center that in the end can yield a large return to industry partners that participate. So industry members pay membership fees to a consortium, or to be part of a consortium, so that they can collectively drive and fund the research. And with that, at least 90% of membership funds are allocated to the direct cost of these shared research projects, which, if you've ever written a grant, 90% of going to direct cost is pretty much unheard of. This structure also fosters synergy, allows for basic scientific research that can lead to significant innovations. It's open to all partners in the center, with the majority of research being conducted by students. So really becomes a training ground for industry human resources, as Jeff was talking about earlier, that there's a really important need for that in this industry. And it's also open to all insect models. Next slide, please. So this research will not only allow a means for optimization of current systems, but also allows the potential for diversification of products, including from the insects themselves, similar to what has been seen in cattle systems, poultry systems, et cetera. Also, microbial products, amino acids, and biogases are just a few products that can be utilized. And it also allows for diversification of insect species and also for further globalization and synergy across the world. Next slide, please. And this globalization of the industry also extends to global partnerships with universities. And I didn't include it on here, but also conduits through organizations such as NACIA, through meetings such as Insects to Feed the World or ESA, also allow communication, fostering partnerships and dissemination of information as well. Next slide, please. So right now we have 3 sites for the center. That is the Indiana University, Purdue University of Indiana, or IUPUI, Mississippi State University, and Texas A&M University. Next slide, please. If funded, so you can go through and tick through the next several. Just go ahead and tick through all of them. I think there's 3 more. Okay, right there. So if funded, each university will receive from NSF $750,000 over a 5-year period to run the center. As I mentioned, industry members pay annual membership fees, and these fees are $25,000 or $50,000 per year to become part of this consortium known as the Industry Advisory Board, so that they can collectively envision and fund the research. So again, the industry that are represented within the Industry Advisory Board drive the research. $25,000 gets you 1 vote, $50,000 gets you 2 votes. And essentially, as I said, the IAB directs center research that will yield these benefits that are listed below: the employee training, linking with other universities, creating new sites is also a possibility. We have these 3 right now, but once the center is formed, we are happy to entertain new sites, regulations, diversification, and rural development. Next slide. Okay, you can also tick through these as well. I think there's 6, 7. Okay, so, and the return of the investment is great. I mean, right now we have non-binding letters for $950,000, which is astounding. So $25,000 or $50,000 will get you this $950,000 worth of research, and this is still growing. That's 20 to 40 times your initial investment. This also gets you fast results, the opportunity for royalty-free licensing. You get to be part of the driving, part of the those that are driving the research, the ability to merge multiple projects, and also increase collaborations. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide, and actually this is only a couple of weeks old, but it's already out of date. We now have non-binding letters from 31 countries with right at $1 million worth of support. So we've already submitted this grant, but we are still accepting non-binding letters. So please contact Dr. Tomberlin, Dr. Picard from IUPUI, or myself with any questions or any interests. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Heather. Again, any questions about the North American Research Center for Insects as Food and Feed, go ahead and put those in the chat and we can address those after the fact. And let's move on to regulatory updates. For this, we've got Andrew Vickerson with Intera, Liz Koutsos from EnviroFlight, and Gabe Mott from Aspire Food Group. I believe Andrew Vickerson is up first. Do we have Andrew in the room?
I can stumble through it.
Sure, Liz, you're welcome to.
Okay, and I do mean stumble. It's not my slides. I think the what Andrew wanted to cover at the beginning of this is really for animal feed applications in the United States, there are 2 ways to get approval to allow an ingredient to be fed. And so the purpose of his couple slides was really to review the process by which you can get approval to use an ingredient for animal feed. So there's 2 general methods in the US. One is to go for generally regarded as safe or recognized as safe GRAS status. And generally that requires either research or a very comprehensive literature review, or both, of safety, utility, and toxicology of the specific ingredient for the specific animal feeding application. So it may be laying hens in lay, or broiler chickens during their grow out period. You assemble an expert panel and that panel reviews the data. And if they agree with the assessment, you can have what's called self-declared GRAS status. You may also submit that document to the FDA for review, and the FDA can issue a letter of objection or no objection, and that can be then used to have GRAS status. In the United States, GRAS status is company specific. So whoever's sponsoring that dossier and that work gets the GRAS status. It is not a universal approval for a specific ingredient. The other option is to go to a food or feed additive petition. And that is very similar on the front end, that you do the comprehensive literature review, and you also will be conducting research with animals to prove safety, utility, and demonstrate toxicology impact. That is then submitted to the American Association of Feed Control Officials. They, in conjunction with the FDA and Center for Veterinary Medicine, have a scientific review of the data. FDA reviews and accepts or rejects the application. If they accept it, they issue a letter of no objection back to AAFCO, and then AAFCO then takes that to their ingredient definition committee, reviews the petition, and then they vote on it, and there's a process of moving from tentative to full regulatory approval. That definition is, once AAFCO has defined an ingredient, that is industry-wide. So it is now available for anyone to sell that ingredient once it's approved for a particular species. So 2 routes of regulatory approval process for animal feed applications. Next slide.
I'm actually here now, Liz, if you can hear me.
Andrew, thank you. You take it over.
Sorry about that. You did a fantastic job there. Probably better than I could have done. I would just probably add to that slide that the AAFCO process, the FAP process, that's what we've used for the black soldier fly approvals. So EnviroFlight and Entera have both used that route. And what we're seeing now, crickets, I believe, is being approved through the GRAS process. They're just 2 different ways of going through the process. One's not better than the other necessarily. Both GRAS approved ingredients and the FAP ingredients get listed in the AAFCO handbook. But if I had to say which one holds more weight, it's probably the FAP process in the eyes of large companies that are going to be using these types of ingredients. And then moving on to this slide, I did consult with AAFCO, and they just wanted to pass on this message. It's just a list of frequently asked questions they get from insect producers and the general public. The first point they wanted to make is that all food ingredients need to be approved by animal species. So even if we get crickets approved for dogs, for example, that doesn't mean we can feed them to poultry, and vice versa. So those approvals are species specific. Once you get a certain threshold of approvals, they'll quite often do a blanket approval. So on the black soldier fly side, once we get approval for poultry, swine, dogs, cats, and fish, they say they would be comfortable, and by they I mean the FDA, they would be comfortable with a blanket approval for all species. So that's what we're working towards on the black soldier fly side of things. On crickets, they get a lot of inquiries on crickets, and the general message there is crickets are not yet approved by AAFCO. They will be included in the AAFCO handbook in the near future, however, because of the GRAS approval that's come up. But again, that doesn't hold as much weight as the FAP process. And then lastly, ingredients need to be defined by AAFCO before they're sold on the market. So if you are putting products onto the market that are not yet listed in their handbook, there is a risk that they will be pulled from the market and a stop sale order will be issued. So that's it for me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Andrew. And Liz, I think you're back up with the US.
You're on mute, Cheryl.
No, I could hear you.
Okay.
My bad.
Yes.
So I have 2 slides here on the regulatory status, and what I want to mention is in regards to this GRAS versus the AAFCO FAP process, is that These dossiers and submissions are generally confidential. And so I have done my best to compile what I know or what I could find out about current status, but I really encourage membership and those considering membership to collaborate with NACIA so that we can better understand what's in the queue. In many of these processes, if one organization submits a dossier on top of another group, it actually slows the entire process down. So this is a great spot for collaboration and group efforts, particularly if you're going through the food additive petition process. So what I've compiled here again is probably not comprehensive, and those of you who are listening today, if you'd like to add to this, please let me know. I'd be happy to update this. Thrilled, in fact, to update this with more information. What we have is for BSFL right now, they've gone through the FAP process and are AFCO approved for meal and partially defatted larva and whole larva. Oil is under review with the FDA. And then all fish, we expect will come with an all species definition in the future, as Andrew mentioned, once we've hit some thresholds for a number of target species. There are some data out there in non-salmonid species as well to corroborate safety and efficacy. Poultry has been defined, and there's an approval for meal, partially defatted larva and whole larva, and the oil dossier is under review. And that's a similar situation with swine, except that the meal and the whole larva definition is right now in a tentative process with AFCO. It's expected to go to the official status probably at their January 2021 meeting. Meal and oil are both under review with FDA, and we anticipate submission of cat dossiers to FDA sometime in 2021. Wild bird is approved for all species of insects at this moment for all life stages. And then we anticipate on BSFL we'll have all species AFCO approval and with FDA no objection once the dog and cat definitions have gone through the process. Mealworms have a GRAS dossier. Oh, let me go back one second. Quickly, I'll go through. Mealworms have GRAS dossier in preparation for salmonids. And again, that's a company specific dossier. And then there is anticipated submission of dossiers for all fish species, poultry and swine later this year, and early 2021 submission for dog and cat. And then cricket, as I mentioned, if anybody has additional information, I would love to add it to this slide. We do know there is the GRAS panel confirmation through the FDA for dog, and that again is a company specific approval process. Go to the Canada slide. I am much less comfortable with my knowledge in this area. What I will tell you is what I know, that there is an approval for BSFL for tilapia and salmonids and for broiler chickens. These are company specific approvals for CFIA. So if you're applying for that ingredient approval, you have to go through essentially the comprehensive dossier process for each company. Canada does not regulate non-agricultural species for feed ingredient application, which is why pet and aquarium fish, dogs, cats, and wild bird are allowed. I will note, and that's for all insect species, I will note that you still have to do a company specific registration with CFIA, but you do not need to do the safety dossier. And then again, mealworm and cricket, you can see I have a lot of question marks, and hopefully I'll get a lot of feedback after this meeting, and we can add that to this information panel and continue to provide that information through the NACIA webpage. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Liz. And Gabe. Are you there, Gabe?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Perfect. So I want to introduce everybody to a great opportunity and a new initiative that NACIA is engaged in. But before I do, I want to touch base briefly on insects in human food across North America, because we haven't touched on that yet. And there are a lot of parallels between insects as human food and the regulatory framework for insects in animal feed, but some substantial differences as well. And I'll focus primarily on the United States. And so there is also both a GRAS and a food additive pathway for human food through the FDA. All insect products that are being sold into human food currently are being sold under a GRAS determination or the GRAS pathway, which essentially means that anybody who is selling an insect ingredient for human food in the United States is affirming that it is generally recognized as safe in that use by experts in the field. So that's what everybody in the US is doing right now. And that determination specifically relates to the generation of an ingredient, a processed ingredient. So farms who are farming insects and not processing them in any sort of meaningful way don't fall under that and don't have any requirements under GRAS or the food additive pathway. And anyone who's taking that ingredient and using it in products or selling it, they also are not beholden to that in particular. They just have to, the FDA may come to them and say, are all the ingredients that you're using safe? And the response needs to be that yes, we're purchasing them from someone who is affirming that this ingredient is generally recognized as safe in this use by experts in the field. So that's the status in the US. So if you are a farmer and not an ingredient processor, while you don't have to make the GRAS affirmation, you do have to ensure that your farm is wholesome and safe, and that the products that you're generating and selling to an ingredient producer are essentially safe for human consumption. Then the people who are processing into the ingredient, they're doing it in a safe fashion, but they fall under FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act, as do anybody who's taking that ingredient and putting it into any sort of consumer product that's going to get sold to people and the people are going to consume. And so really the prime regulatory framework that you work under in the United States for human food is FSMA, that Food Safety Modernization Act. In Canada, it is the Safe Foods for Canadians Act, run by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And then there's a different and more complicated regulatory process in Mexico that we can talk about if somebody has specific questions, but it would take some time to get into. So that's the framework that we're under. And there's been some calls over the past few years for greater regulation or greater structure around regulation for human food in the United States, for insects for human food in the United States. And generally, we don't need special regulation, certainly not around making ingredients and making products, because as any food, we fall under the Food Safety Modernization Act, or in Canada, the Safe Foods for Canadians Act. Now, where things get interesting is first, within the country, there is some ambiguity. Nobody's filed a GRAS petition with the FDA. Everybody's simply self-affirming GRAS. To Liz's point earlier, if somebody engages in that GRAS pathway or the food additive pathway, it has an immediate impact on everybody else in the industry. So I would encourage anyone who is considering making a GRAS petition to the FDA or going down the food additive pathway, it would be critically important for you to engage with the rest of the industry before doing so, because it will have a cascading impact on everybody, and it should be something that's done in association with NACIA. So with that said, then the issues are, there's some degree of ambiguity around the regulations, but not much. But there's certainly an issue with harmonization across the three different countries. The three countries have very different approaches to how they're dealing with insects as human food, and that's going to cause substantial problems for cross-border trade, and that's something we want to address. And so this past year, NACIA was looking at an approach to firm up communication around regulation in the individual countries, but we were approached by the Standards Council of Canada to look at harmonizing frameworks across North America. And it's a great opportunity, and the Standards Council of Canada is a sort of semi-governmental body that helps industry develop standards that are going to be important for them, and help essentially make it easier to do business in their jurisdictions. So they came to us. We've had an ongoing conversation with them, built out a framework, and it's built on, and I can't thank IPIF enough for this. If you haven't read the IPIF document, and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I'm sure someone will throw a link into chat if people want to go look at the IPIF document. It's a great document. I think required reading for anybody who's in the industry. Doesn't matter where you are in the industry. It's not a small document, but the IPIF document is spectacular. Everybody should go read it cover to cover. So IPIF has generously offered us that as a framework to build a document on top of. Now, the document that we're looking to build is called a technical specification. And so what a technical specification is essentially one step down from some sort of formalized standard. It tends to be fully optional, voluntary compliance, no real teeth, but it gives the industry a standard to rally behind. And then essentially, I would expect that everybody within the industry would commit to only working with people who are complying with the standard. And that makes us all safer, because any adverse health effect that occurred from someone consuming insect products would impact all of us. So if everybody aligns behind these standards, that's great. And then over time, these are the types of standards that eventually get formalized. And if you go, for example, onto the FDA's website and poke around at some of the standards that they have listed there, a lot of the standards that the FDA uses for specific industries come from the industries themselves. They've built the standards, they've all come into compliance, they provided them to the FDA, and let's face it, I mean, everybody's busy, right? So the FDA looks at the standards. If they are reasonable standards, then often the FDA will give them their imprimatur, put them on the website, and that's what everyone needs to follow. So then the next steps for NACIA are, we put together a package, and it really was a collaborative effort from a lot of people at NACIA leadership and some people outside. We put together a good package for the Standards Council of Canada. They did an internal assessment. They decided this was a project that they were really genuinely interested in moving forward on. And so they've committed. Our next steps are to gather representatives from the FDA, the CFIA, APHIS, SAGARPA, possibly USDA, that might fall under, or APHIS might be sufficient for that. We're also, and I didn't want to list them here, pulling people from academy and, sorry, not academy. Why is my vocabulary failing me? The academic fields, right? So we're pulling in academics. We're going to be pulling in people from across industry with very specific experience, food safety experts, people who really are professionals in this field, to take the IPIF set of standards and then the three non-harmonized competing North American standards, bring them together and build an integrated package that we can publish for the industry as a whole and that we can all use going forward. So that's our objective there. We're starting that in 2021. It's going to be a long road to hoe to get there. So I don't think that we're going to get results out next year, but we'll work towards that as a goal, and we'll provide greater framework as we progress and as we have better expectations of what our outcomes will look like. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Gabe. No small feat will that be, for sure. Beautiful. Well, thank you all. Again, questions on these slides, please feel free to pop them into the chat. And let's keep moving. We have a panel discussion. RNA, I will turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
Hello?
Yeah, this is RNA, founder of Little Herds. Today, we actually want to bring you some quick takes from multiple experts across the industry. So rather than a typical panel format, we've reached out to 6 of our members who have expertise across the industry, and we've sent them some questions from y'all ahead of time. And so we'll get rolling here. First up, we have Jared Golden, co-founder and vice president of research and innovation at Intimo Farms. Jared, are you with us?
Yep.
Great. What are
All the way
common
from Canada.
misconceptions that people have, and how can we combat these misunderstandings and communicate more effectively?
So thank you for having me, and it's so awesome to see so many familiar faces, some looking a little older than they did when I first met you, but well and healthy indeed. So thank you, Cheryl and NACIA, for having me, and RNA for moderating the panel. This question came to me, and Cheryl had asked me to share a story with everybody regarding, I guess, what Juliet Lesnick really taught me is called othering, or how people perceive something based on preconceived notions. So when we first started and we wanted to get our powder tested for its nutritional profile, we sent it to the Canadian approved lab. Sorry, RNA, maybe you want to mute your, thank you. So we sent the powder to a lab here. We wanted to get the nutrition profile tested and some other tests around virology and, to see how kind of clean the powder was or what we were dealing with. And I got a really awkward call from the CEO of the company, and I could tell he was very, very uncomfortable and he wasn't really sure what to say, and he seemed a bit confused, and he told me this was an extremely difficult conversation for him to have. And I said, well, just put it out there, what's going on, what's up? And he said, well, I've never had to do this before, and I don't know really how to say it to you, but we just can't work with you guys. And I was kind of taken aback, and I said, well, what's the problem? What did we do? Why would you say that? And he said, well, clearly you guys cheated. I don't know how else to say it. And I said, well, what do you mean we cheated? And he said, well, you must have treated the powder with some kind of bleach or some kind of application. And I said, why? Like, why would we have done that? And why do you think that? And he said, well, it's super clean. It's like, there's really, when we compare it to raw meat or raw chicken or even processed to some degree, there's just nothing there. And I said, well, why would you expect it to be full of viruses or other small bacteria or molds or whatever it may be? And he said, well, because it's a bug. And right away, it really hit me, how high this hill is, this wall that we have to climb to unother everybody's perceptions of the fact that these things are automatically dirty because they're bugs. And I mean, we can see it to the extent that we even call problems with our computers bugs, or we tell people don't bug me if they're irritating you. So I just wanted to kind of share that story and what it took to convince him that that's absolutely not what we did. There was no treatment, heat, light, bleach, whatever it may be, and the product was in a pure form. So I thought that story could kick us off. It's entertaining, it's funny. We certainly laugh about it now. And the great news is we've maintained a 6-year wonderful relationship with this lab that's done almost all our testing and all the wonderful discovering of all the macro and micronutrients that are so rich in powders like cricket powder, as well as fiber and everything else. So thank you again for having me. I wish everyone well and look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jared. Funny thing is that Jared didn't know that Dr. Lesnick was next up on our discussion. Next up, we've got Dr. Julie Lesnick with Wayne State University in Detroit. Dr. Julie Lesnick, are you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Great. What's the question that you were most tired of hearing on this subject? And what would you like to say about it so that you never have to answer it again? Man, that would be great.
Right. I mean, truth is, the question I get most tired of getting and answering is, have you eaten bugs? What do they taste like? And so that's not that interesting for you all. But even then, like any question is engagement. People want to know more. So I now just have answers in my pocket that is really easy for me to answer in those instances because it's somebody's opportunity to learn. And so if I can tell them mealworms taste more like nuts and crickets taste more like shellfish, and that gives them an idea, we go forward from there. But what I thought I would share with you is actually a question I get that is quite informed, and I thought my answer could help you all in case you ever come across this question. So my expertise is kind of on human insect interactions. Like I'm an ecologist in a lot of ways in my research. And people will ask me about, why are you promoting insects as food when we are facing an insect apocalypse? And what these people are keying into is the fact that the biodiversity of insects is at the forefront of reduction with habitat loss, climate change. We know that insect species are dropping off fast. compared to other kind of large-bodied animals. And so how can I promote eating them when we have this insect apocalypse? And so I share with them a few things. One, when I'm talking to a group of Americans and trying to get you to eat insects, it's to take advantage of these farmed insects. But I do try to emphasize that people who have had traditionally foraged diets, we shouldn't take their traditional foods away from them. So if you are already traditionally foraging insects, that is your culture, please continue to do so. But if you are looking to adopt insects in your diet, then yes, it would be too much of an impact on the environment if we all started going out and wild foraging insects. But the other part is that the insect apocalypse has much more to do with human impact on our environment. So fragmentation, pesticides in farming. And so if we were actually to choose insects as a protein alternative as opposed to soy, that would reduce our reliance on soy, our reliance on soy fields, our reliance on pesticides. So choosing insects as opposed to farmed plant-based alternative feeds actually helps in fighting the insect apocalypse. And so in kind of a counterintuitive, eating bugs actually helps bugs.
Love it. Thank you, Dr. Julie Lesnick. Fantastic perspective. Next up, we have Pat Crowley, founder and CEO of Chapool. Pat, I see you there. What critical changes must we make to face the future effectively? Very broad question.
Oh, yeah. I think you had highlighted in light of COVID especially, and I think that COVID in some regards is just highlighted some of the global food insecurities that we faced prior to it, but they've just come to the light. And I remember reading in USA Today the need for deglobalization of our food supply and thinking that this was just an incredible silver lining to a very unfortunate situation in the world today. But I think in light of all that, I would have three recommendations for the industry. And the first one would be to move beyond the concept of sustainability, which is a resource in, resource out efficiency standpoint, and focus more on diving into regenerative agriculture and circular agriculture. For the past 5 years, we've seen the rise of plant-based movement, and a lot of that is very simplistic, but highlighted in the sustainability of a binary kind of resources in, resources out. But the movements right now that are happening there, I think will go beyond plant-based, are the regenerative movements that are much more inclusive of animal agriculture and look at it from a much more a circular system that is an ecosystem-based approach to our food supply. And so insects just fit right into that fold where they're appreciating the multiple life forms of bacteria and fungi and insects. And it's not just this plants versus animals conversation. And it's a rising tide that a lot of big international corporations are getting behind. General Mills has some big initiatives, for example. And so we need to do everything we can to align with some of those movements that are happening in place right now. So first one, move from sustainability to regenerative. Actually, here's a plug for the movie Kiss the Ground. If you haven't seen it, it's on Netflix right now. They do an incredible job at marketing the role that microbial diversity, especially in soil, but how it's connected in a circular fashion to animals, et cetera, is one of the potentially the best things we can do to address climate change. And I watched it and I was blown away because I said, this is everything we've needed to do for FRAS from an industry perspective and marketing those benefits. So watch Kiss the Ground. I think then number two, I would say that we really need to lean much harder into the premiumization benefits of insects. It's viable to get a farm up and running with simply that commodity-based economics of looking at just selling the larva, inputs in, outputs. But as we do that, it just pushes you more and more towards that linear view of extracted food production, where if we can really valorize, especially the FRAS, that complements the circularity potential of insects. And then another huge role huge opportunity for premiumization is certainly in the microbe microbial benefits, whether those are immunological to the animals that eat them, et cetera. And that will just fund earlier stage growth of the production of insects. The more we can have those premium markets, and that just fosters evolution within the industry. If we can have more and more players entering the market at earlier and earlier stages, localized, et cetera. And then the third, this is more specific to the private industry, but it's aligned with some of the previous two recommendations, and that's to really seek alternative forms of capital. The traditional kind of archaic at this point, venture capital is very extractive. You know, put money in, and then in a 5-year window, take more than you put in out, and that's the exact systemic issues that have plagued our global food production, with this extraction-based mentality that's led to us creating band-aids in the green revolution of petrochemical fertilizers, pesticides, et cetera. And as you know, Julie's saying, it's caused very correlative to the 6th major extinction on the planet right now. And I think previously, you know, pre-COVID, I think a lot of the impact-based investment and investments based on climate change, et cetera, have been mostly marketing and a lot of greenwashing. But I believe that the tide is changing, and there's a lot more capital coming into carbon-based metrics, et cetera. So get creative with your business models and your sources of funding. As Jeff said, you know, think outside the box. And the quote I like to use is, you know, once the world thinks you're crazy, you're free to do what you want. And if you've expressed interest in insects, there's people that think you're crazy, no doubt. So those are the 3 recommendations: move beyond sustainability to regenerative, focus on premiumization, and be creative with you know, circular economic models. And then finally, just a call to action. I think that food security and climate change are the biggest challenges that we're facing as a generation. And that can be incredibly daunting, especially in light of just everything else that's going on in the world right now. And people are certainly at risk of suffering from trauma fatigue, but insect agriculture has the potential to be just this bright, shiny ray of hope in the world. And with all due respect to all the industry veterans that are on the call today and the immense amount of work you put into it, I think this is ground zero for our industry and should be looked at that way. In reality, our combined efforts are still insignificant compared to, you know, global food and feed. But now is the time. It's ripe, and the world is ready for us, I think. So there's how many people? 109 people or so on the call today. So each one of your individual sparks, fan those now, and now is the time to pour kerosene on them. So
that was awesome. Thank you, Pat. And definitely true. It's a whole new paradigm. Virginia Emery is next up, founder and CEO of Beta Hatch. Virginia, what do you see as the biggest challenge in insect ring industry at the moment from where you sit?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I'm going to keep it real brief. I think one of the greatest challenges is still scale. So we've seen a lot of capital flow into the sector, particularly in Europe. Here in the US, it's a really underfunded opportunity. And ultimately, we're probably going to see European players establish operations here, which is a shame because we have such incredible companies here in the US that are, have had challenges with scaling and growing. Even with the amount of capital that's been invested already, which is on the order of $500 million, and even with the large facilities being scaled up, insects still represent a tiny fraction of the total market opportunity, especially in animal feed. And I think that I encounter this on a daily basis, this challenge of explaining the size of the opportunity, the scale of demand. Companies like Skredding have told us that their current monthly demand exceeds global yearly supply. So if every insect producer in the world on an annual basis, that volume of production that they're making today were to go just to that one customer, it still wouldn't be 1/12 of the demand that they have for the products that we're producing. So I think that there's still this big challenge in scale. I think we're going to need to see more investments from strategic players, from venture capital, from project finance, from government agencies. We're starting to see some governments. Canada's been stepping up in some of that economic development funding, but I think the United States is really falling behind here. So this North American group, I think we need to really think about ways that we can leverage the success that we have here, and not lose the momentum that we do have to players from other parts of the world. Because right now, I think that question of scale is really one that is on everyone's mind, who I've been speaking with. And it limits our ability to secure customers, to band together, to contract with equipment manufacturers. And so I'm really excited to see how NACIA can work together to hopefully address some of those challenges of scale. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Virginia. Absolutely agree. David Drew, up next, co-founder of AgroProtein. David, how has the insect rearing industry changed in the past 5 years as someone who's been around for a little bit? And what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years if you're just shooting from the hip?
Thanks, RNA, and thanks very much. It feels nice to be on a call with the North American gang. I'm based in Frankfurt, and I think going back to what was just said before about scale, the last 5 years has all been a scale story, right? In insects, or 5 or 10. You know, probably the earliest piece of sold insects was kids. We used to sell my uncle worms for his fishing. And that was the first sort of selling of insects that I kind of understood. Then it got a little bit better, but that was individual worms and maggots and stuff. Then the extraordinary SIT program. I suspect most of you are familiar with what happened with the SIT program down in Guatemala, Panama, and the work that the US Department of Agriculture has done in Central America and Mexico. It's extraordinary. It's the birth of mass insect rearing. But they were selling per fly, per sterile fly at the end of it, despite their great work. Then we kind of moved into the specialty food world, where a little bit of crickets, very early doors, or some novelty stuff, where we started to see some per kilo sales. And then over the last few years in feed, insects as feed, we've started to bring a bit of per tonnage into the equation. And that's really the what's changed over the years for me. Where we are now, we're on the brink. I see something coming very importantly in, which is waste management and circularity, which is becoming in as much of the story as is the flies and the maggots and the insects and the products, is the circularity and the waste management. And then to the future, where do we go to? I see the future. I see sustainable food replacing the novel food that we have at the moment. So there we start to talk about, you know, minimum audit quantities of a ton, because people are making hamburgers purely out of or enhanced cricket feeds rather than just as a novel food. On the feed side, very quickly, I see animal feed purchasers not buying in quantities less than 40 tons. If you're not selling a 40-foot container, then you're not in the game. And then again, waste management, really that being the key to the future as we start to increase the opportunity for maggots to eat. Domestic garbage, manure is something that we're particularly keen on. And then maybe the moonshot. The moonshot for me is producing protein at the point of use, not 10,000 kilometers away like fish meal. But the moonshot, and that plays into using the manures. But how about using human waste? That's the stuff that excites us for way down the line. And what seemed like a crazy idea suddenly starts to be being repeated by some fairly crazy people in the engineering world, and Mr. Musk and various others. So yeah, that's how I see the last 5, where we are at the moment, and perhaps a little bit of futurology. Thanks, RNA.
I love it. I love it. Controversial and exciting ideas. Next up, and finally, we have Keith Driver, CEO of Intera Feed. Keith, what is the #1 way we, industry as a whole, and or NACIA specifically, can really make a substantial difference?
Absolutely. It was brought to me by a meeting I had with Case Arts from Protex, actually. One of those eye-opening moments. So I'll credit him for the insight, which was, while we as insiders may believe we understand the definition of the industry, I don't think we've really done a great job so far of defining insects and agriculture and where we fit in the world and how important we're going to be. We have to really elevate that message. I mean, I think if we look at plant-based proteins, they've done a great job of this, of defining the territory and grabbing shares of hearts and minds. And so an industry association like ourselves can provide that sort of commonality of voice. The insect industry is as follows, is made up of these people, is active, is moving, and it provides a focal point for information where we can collectively amplify and share the good. We saw that in regulatory. We're hearing that from people speaking before me here, lots of opportunities to do that. But we can also proactively address the bad, i.e. there'll be moments of bad press or there'll be haters or the internet or whatever that comes out of that, and the ability to address that in an industry with a professionalism that accompanies that will be important. And the big one that I see starting that process for us is this SCC project that Gabe talked about, where we really need some industry-led standards. It speaks to the point Jared brought up of the early days of, well, insects are dirty and how could you be clean, and having an industry-led hygiene standard may seem like a small thing, but it answers, it would have been a great answer to the question before early on, and it'll help open more doors as we go forward. So I'm really keen to see us define the industry, own the industry, or own our space in that industry, and then create the playing field for the various companies, innovations that are going to come behind us.
Thank you, Keith. I don't know if RNA is
yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Cheryl. Thank you all of our experts for joining us today. And I guess for the listeners, attendees, members out there, if you have questions for experts in the industry, let us know. We're working on some things. We hope to be having some lunch and learns soon with experts. So we'd love to help get your questions in front of them. We're all going to be able to learn and benefit from sharing this knowledge.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much. Thank you to all of our panelists in the home stretch. I know we're running a little bit over. We're still trying to stay conscious of everyone's time. We are going to go into a high-level overview of the NACIA strategic plan. So Justin Butner of Intimo Central and NACIA Secretary Extraordinaire, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to all of our presenters so far. My name is Justin Butner. I am the Secretary of the Board for NACIA, and I'm going to be speaking today to our strategic plan. So about this time last year, we had an election for a new board of directors, and along with those new 9 board members came a new energy. And the first task right out of the gate was to make sure that we were working efficiently and effectively, and so we needed to set the long-term strategic vision for NACIA. Now, the first task, creating the 5-year vision of NACIA's future, and then backfilling what the steps to get there would look like. And our vision then was, as it is now, is to create a strong, healthy, vibrant community of successful companies involved in insect agriculture. So when we created that, we started out with a few key values. The first is that these were going to need to be member-guided decisions. We're a member-based organization, and our values and priorities are going to need to reflect those of our membership. Second, if we were really going to be successful with this, we needed to have SMART goals, specific, measurable, assignable, relevant, and time-based. And the third was to make sure that we hit the right mix between having board involvement, having people on the board of directors to really champion and drive projects forward, but at the same time have tasks and projects be able to be delegated so that everything wasn't getting bottlenecked in a smaller group. So we started with a review of the activities that NACIA had accomplished or had considered in the first 3 or so years of its existence. We sent out a written survey to all of our members and then followed up with phone interviews for a kind of a representative sample that spoke to the broad diversity of who our members are. And we put that together, prioritized things, created a draft plan, held meetings, and ultimately finalized a strategic plan. Now, when we spoke to our members, we found that there were a number of categories of priorities, but the way it shook out, the top 5 priorities, first and foremost, was regulatory. And then following that, industry knowledge, research, consumer education and market development, and rounding out the top 5 was media. So the strategic plan translated into us creating or refining our working groups, centering them around SMART goals and specific objectives. And so for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to look at each group individually and go into detail of what their goals were for the year and what they've accomplished relative to those goals. And I want to thank the team at Interafeed and also Cheryl for assistance in putting together these slides. We can jump to the next slide. So the first 2 working groups ended up with kind of complementary action items. We're going to talk about them at the same time. The safety working group was tasked with developing and publishing supply chain guidance. And the regulatory roadmap group was seeking to combine the existing regulatory knowledge from various stakeholders, creating a checklist of current status of approvals, reviewing those with regulators, and ultimately publishing guidance. Now, what's happened in the last year, we've certainly identified the need for industry guidelines for safety and regulatory summary. And as Gabe spoke to earlier with the Standards Council of Canada project, a project has been proposed, stakeholders have been sought, and thanks to as Gabe said, the wonderful work that the International Platform of Insects for Food and Feed, or IPIF, our sister organization in Europe, did with their guide on good hygiene practices. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're going to take that and adapt it to North American standards. Next slide. The End Market Information Group was tasked with creating market reports that are defensible, credible, and citable, adaptable, easy to use, and value adding about the market potential for our industry. Now, these will help companies in areas ranging from forecasting, seeking funding, business plan development, and a number of other things. The status of this, Interafeed has undertaken and completed a market study with a credible third party, and they'll be sharing the results of this study with NACIA on the members call immediately following this call. Next, the Communication Working Group was tasked to communicate effectively with members and other stakeholders about the work and projects that NACIA is doing. There's a number of things to report here. We have instituted and kept up with a quarterly newsletter to make sure that our members and beyond know what's going on with us. We've created a new logo and completed a website redesign. We have switched over to a new CRM to facilitate communications with our members and make sure that we understand who our members are. There's the annual meeting that we're all in today to kind of communicate and share the status of everything. And lastly, board member Kevin Bachhuber put on a webinar a couple months ago titled Federal Disaster Assistance Programs and You, which helped member companies to understand and apply for federal aid programs to kind of help get them through these challenging times. Next. The Stakeholder Linkage Group was tasked to improve the strength of inter-industry and intra-industry communications. Again, a number of things to report here. We've been working with our sister organizations, IPIF in Europe, AFIA in Asia, and IPAA in Australia on a white paper, The Global Future of Insects as Food and Feed. What's exciting here is that we're seeing the shift slowly from at the company specific level to projects at the regional organization level, and now increasingly we're getting global cooperation across the board. The Entomological Society of America has invited us to present at their symposium next month. What's exciting here is that they didn't just invite us to give a presentation in the specific world of insects as food and feed, but they've invited us into the larger conversation around mass producing insects. It's going to be titled The Art, Science, and Industry of Insect Rearing. Earlier this year, the LARTA Institute invited us to bring a panel on insect agriculture to their virtual ag conference. The LARTA Institute is a company that helps recipients of SBIR grants commercialize. And as the industry continues to grow, as more companies and groups and individuals are getting SBIR grants or other grants for research and funding, it's really exciting to build these relationships, and that speaks to our ability to find allies and work with them. We've also had engagement with the North American Research Center for Insects as Food and Feed, as Heather spoke to earlier, and again with the Standards Council of Canada project. A number of government agencies have been approached as potential stakeholders for this industry. And lastly, the administrative group was tasked to ensure organizational compliance and build infrastructure to support larger projects moving forward. In the last year, NACIA has incorporated, we have established bookkeeping and insurance, and we have submitted an application for a 501c6 tax-exempt designation. And that's just working its way through the gears, and we expect approval by December of this year. So to quickly reiterate and condense those accomplishments, in the last year, we've finished a market study, educational webinar, a number of administrative tasks around incorporation, web logo and CRM redesign, and participated in the LARTA conference. And still open, we have the white paper with the global organizations, which we expect to be finished momentarily, the ESA symposium next month, and the 501c6 designation by the end of this year. There is also the Open Standards Council of Canada project, which is a long-term project. And of course, regular communications, which is kind of an ongoing and perpetual one. So I want to thank the members of NACIA who've been tapped to participate and help out with these projects. And I want to thank the current board of directors for their drive and determination in really moving these projects forward. As many of you may know, we've recently closed voting for a new board of directors. The results will be announced later today on our members call, and the new board will be installed before the end of this year. So with so many projects recently completed or will be completed in the near future, the new board is really going to have the opportunity to review the long-term strategic plan and determine what the concrete next several steps are going to be to work in that direction. And in passing the baton to the new leadership, I think I speak for all of us when I say we're really excited to see how you're going to move with the successes we've had over the last year and really continue to take NACIA forward into the future. And so with that, thank you all for your time. And Cheryl, I'll pass it back to you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Justin. Well, we've packed a lot into a short time today, and I would like to open it up maybe just for a few questions before we close. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I might see the chat as well. Wendy Lou, do we have any big questions that we should try to address before we let everyone go?
Well, I wanted to thank everyone who's been answering questions as we go along. And just to remind everyone that if you haven't received the members only link and you are a member, then please either send me a private chat or send an email to info@nacia.org. That's my only housekeeping, Cheryl.
Beautiful. Well, I'll tell you what, if we've already addressed a lot of the questions, we will ask you, if you didn't get a question in and you still have a question, send it to info@nacia.org. I would like to thank all of our attendees for taking the time to join us today. I was so pleasantly surprised to see so many people on board for this meeting. I'd like to thank the board for all of their help preparing this meeting, bringing this to fruition, all the presentations, all of the work that's gone into not just this meeting, but the results that we've been able to report at this meeting. Thank you to our panelists. And we also appreciate everybody's learning with us as we're entering this virtual world of meetings. And thank you for your patience with the little technology glitches that we've had. Hope to see you soon, and stay tuned for more updates in the near future. Take care, everyone. Bye.